Right, my turn now to do a little segment. I'm the Gunsmith t-shirt on as we're talking about shooting, and this is something that I've been deeply involved with since 2010. It goes way back before that, but I had no real evidence of what was going on or what was happening. But in 2010 there was an effort by shooting organisations and the WWT, RSPB and the government to get lead banned. Yeah, total lead shot ban for shooting. Now, as a gunsmith and a shooter in the UK, that would have been devastating for me. My business, I think, would go down by 50% overnight, and I wouldn't be able to make a living out of it. So I'd be, I don't know, cleaning the roads or stacking shelves in a supermarket. So I did some research and tried to fight it. And the more research I did and the deeper I got, I found in the end, believe it or not, it was the deep state that was involved. There was an international agreement introduced by the African Eurasia Waterbird Agreement, which BASC, which is the leading UK shooting organisation, was a member of. That was funded, believe it or not, by the UN Environment Programme. Yes, the idea of banning lead goes right the way up to the UN. I didn't think so. So the deep state is involved in this as well. I was only a small cog in the big wheel of trying to stop it. But when you find that the leading shooting organisation you think is there to support you, and that you've been a member of for 40 years, is actually working with the people that are trying to ban lead, you think, hang on a minute, what is really going on? BASC were telling me they were going to fight any lead ban, and they said they wanted science to prove it. So John Harradine of BASC was co-opted as a subcontractor to a group called the Lead and Ammunition Group Compliance Research, which was called the Steering Committee. Now this was the start of it. They were going to find research and see what was happening on the compliance with the lead ban for wildfowling. Now BASC were on it as a subcontractor, which means they were going to be paid for their work. So the organisation that I was a member of, which I subsequently dropped my membership and didn't pay it, was being paid to find the evidence to ban lead shot. You can't make this up. The steering committee met in Slimbridge in Bristol. The Wildlife and Wetlands Trust are involved in it. They were the leading runners. The government was involved in it with the Wildlife Division of the Environment Agency. And the government steering group then brought in the RSPB. So they're also involved in it. But they came in as what was called corresponding members, which meant they would see the minutes and they would be allowed to comment on it, but they didn't actually sit in on the meetings. So you had the WWT, the RSPB, BASC and the government. And they're now all working to find the evidence. And then at the end, what they're going to do is come out and say that we, the wildfowlers, weren't using steel to shoot ducks, and some members were using lead without any proof, only hearsay. But we'll get on to that in a second. There was 4 main things that the steering committee were going to do. This is back in 2009. There was a database of game dealers, the purchase of game to see whether the ducks that or geese that they bought had any lead in them, a survey of BASC members, and a survey of shoot managers. As I said, BASC were subcontracted onto the committee as a subcontractor and were paid for their survey work. The WWT was also paid for its survey work and were full members of the steering group. This document from the minutes of the steering group shows that the contract was worth £63,000, and that would have been split between the two organisations. Now you've got to remember that BASC are there to support shooting, so why are they getting involved in an organisation like the WWT and RSPB that have come out and said publicly that they want a total ban on lead shot? I found this very odd at the time, and I still find it odd. Still, from the minutes of January 2009, the issue of game dealers was brought up and where the duck came from. BASC had previously responded to this point, it says, and by January, in terms of commercial shoots, organised days are likely to be mainly pheasant, with one duck drive at the end of the day. Well, that's true. Then they go on to say, this is really defending shooting, that most shoots use lead for shooting the game and will have lead on them, and therefore by the time they get to the duck they'll still be using lead. No proof, just hearsay. So-called scientific this is supposed to be. Supposed to be the evidence that they're going to find to ban lead for shooters. It sounds like they're trying to organise something and find the proof to kill us. Not happy bunny now. So by October 2010 we have the results of the survey. Basic principle is that 70% of the duck tested had lead in it. And then the BASC survey of members said that 45% of its members occasionally used lead for shooting wildfowl. The 45% figure from the BASC survey is hearsay. It is not evidence. And the 70% of the duck with lead in them cannot be proven that the duck were shot in England, where it was illegal to shoot with lead at the time. It was legal to shoot mallard duck in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, and it is very possible with the game dealers that duck are passed around, and that the duck that they tested may have come from Scotland, because England may not have been shooting enough ducks to supply the market. This survey is just trashed. It's just gone out the window. But they're still trying to use it against us. It was in The Guardian, in most of the national newspapers. Yeah, I know, mainstream media again. Fake news. But it's built on so-called scientific surveys. I don't see it myself. In the submission to the government after the steering group, Tim Andrews, who's a civil servant in Bristol, wrote to the government and asked for publication of the DEFRA report, the study, and this was to go to the Lead Ammunition Group, which he was also talking to John Swift, who's then the chief executive of BASC at the time. Now, I wrote 2 articles around this time for Countryman's Weekly, and they give a list on the Lead Ammunition Group of all the scientific surveys they've been looking at, and I couldn't find any compelling evidence for any lead ban in any of it. They were report on report on report. A lot of them were discussion papers. A lot of the so-called scientific papers were printed on obscure websites in the States. Many of them had not been peer reviewed. Many of them wouldn't even pass peer review. And the study that the steering group done never passed peer review. I was told that by an inside source. Said, Ian, did you know that the survey that we've done has not passed peer review? That's why the government reluctant to publish it. It's crazy what's going on. But anyway, now we lead on. Now we've gone in to John Swift, who's the leading shooting organisation. He's the CEO of BASC, and he has now been made chairman of the Lead Ammunition Group. And they're going to look at the whole of the science surrounding lead shots. So now we've got the Lead and Ammunition Group is set up. This is BASC, Country Landowners Association, Gun Trade Association, Countryside Alliance, Game and Wildlife Trust, Environment Agency, Institute of Wildlife Health, National Game Dealers Association, the RSPB, WFAW, which is, I think they're vets that are involved with wildlife. Exactly what they do I don't know. And the WWT, who are the main leading role in the ban lead campaign. Now, this group is set up, and there's two factions: the conservationists, RSPB, WWT, etc., and the shooting organisations, the Gun Trade Association, BASC and Countryside Alliance. Now, it's two distinct groups. You think they're bound to sort this out, but you've got to remember that they've already had the survey, and the survey's already said that 70% of the duck they tested had lead in them, and 45% of members said that they used lead occasionally. This is still driving the campaign forward. Although we've totally trashed that by now, none of the shooting papers would actually take the information. Not sure why. I've got my suspicions, but I'm not sure. I did a very, very quick pro and non-lead survey of my own with the organisations, and I came to the conclusion that anti-lead, with the WWT and RSPB that we know, I also put BASC in this category, because I believed by this time that John Swift and John Harradine of BASC were colluding with the WWT and RSPB and the government to get lead banned. That's what I believe was going on and what was happening. The WFAW I also put in there, being that it's the veterans organisation. I'm not quite sure where they stand. The I Don't Knows was the Game Dealers, the Country Landowners Association, the Gun Trade Association, who I would thought would have been on my side, the Institute of Environmental Health. As scientists, they were sitting on the fence, and also as scientists, the Wildlife and Game Trust were also sitting on the fence at the time. The only organisation I could find who was listening to me and understood what I was saying was the Countryside Alliance, and I said they were pro-lead shot. They were going to fight any lead ban, and that's all I could go on. About this time in 2010, I was given the minutes of the Research Advisory Committee for BASC. The meeting was held in November in 2009, and it said, "In the light of growing evidence of a problem with lead ammunition, the committee believes that the use of lead ammunition in shooting and stalking is becoming increasingly unsustainable." So BASC were leading its committee to this, and then it would lead on to its members. And in the same minutes I found this, that the council should make the members aware that there was going to be a lead ban sooner rather than later. So this is the way that things were steering. So they've now, the people that are involved at the top, John Swift and John Harradine, were now trying to persuade the council. But what happened was, this went to the committee, but they never talked about it. I got this from a committee member who was disgusted of what was going on within BASC, and I was talking to him. He was a fellow old shooter like me, and he was asking me to get the information out. I'd already written the 2 articles for Countryman's Weekly, and now I was standing on my own. I was the only guy in England fighting to stop a total lead ban. I was hoping that the Countryside Alliance would help me out a little bit in the future, but that was still to be seen. At the same time, I found this piece of information that dates back to March 2009. The Game Group, I'm not exactly sure who they are, but they said that the risk of eating game meat to consumers in the UK is low. The risk of eating game meat is low. Because at this time there was also a fear put out that eating lead shot game and lead shot meat like wild fowl and also pheasants and deer shot with lead bullets, that the fragments of lead would contaminate the meat. But they're saying that it's still low. Well, we might get into this a bit later, but that's a totally different subject to what we're talking about today. But they also try to add this to the mix and try basically to scare people that shooting lead shot game and deer was going to hurt you. There was a report done, one of the reports that the Lead Ammunition Group was looking at was a report to DEFRA by Roger Quay. I think that's how you pronounce it, Q-U-Y, his surname is. And the conclusions of his report was that the distinctions between background lead and abnormal lead levels was not well defined. So they couldn't tell the difference between lead that was normal in the environment and lead that had been dropped by shooters. So the evidence is there, but I don't think they paid much weight to it because they still wanted to ban lead shot. One of the questions that I've been asking is, if we're going to use an alternative to lead, like tungsten or tin or bismuth, how toxic is non-toxic shot and ammunition? Because if you work in engineering and you work with tungsten, you can get a reaction from the tungsten. One of the engineers in British Aerospace told me that when they worked with tungsten and were machining it, they had to take a pint of milk. And at the end of the shift, before lunch, they would take a pint of milk, and that was to counteract the fumes that would come off the tungsten. So what else is in tungsten, and how dangerous is it? These questions have got to be asked. I then found a piece of information online, and that the US Army had started producing green training ammunition. And what were they using for green training ammunition? Tungsten bullets. They were finding that people were getting sick. They were finding it was damaging the watercourse, and in the end the army had to stop using it on health grounds. So what effect is tungsten shot going to have on the environment and on other animals? That hasn't been found out yet. In Massachusetts, the governor actually stopped the army from training with tungsten ammunition, which is very surprising. So we're being told that tungsten we can use in shot to shoot ducks, yet the governor of Massachusetts is banning it. Interesting, isn't it? Then I found a report, Camp Cod online in the newspaper, that tungsten bullets were used and that they were damaging the watercourse. This is all evidence against tungsten. Why are we using tungsten shot, for Christ's sake? No, the evidence is beginning to come in now. Then in 2013 I found that the BASC logo that was on the Lead Ammunition Group Committee website had been removed, and I asked one simple question: why has the Basque logo been removed from the Lead Ammunition Group website? In response, Basque said, yes, we have a number of staff to take the minutes, but they have no other role and are not involved in the reports or research. I'm afraid that that is untrue. Basque were, yes, they were doing the secretariat and taking the minutes for the meeting, but they were also running the website. They'd also been paid to do the survey that the Lead Ammunition Group was using on compliance with lead shot. And John Swift, who was the CEO of Basque, was the chairman of the Lead Ammunition Group. How can they not be involved? So they're telling us one thing as members, that they're not involved in banning lead ammunition, and then steaming in with the WWT and RSPB on the other hand. Oh, you see where I get cross? Right, so now we know that the shooting organisation was involved in trying to get lead banned. We also know that the so-called green non-toxic alternatives aren't very good. Steel is 25% less effective than lead. Steel can damage your barrels. I had a big conversation with Basque online on the Pigeon Watch group, which I was eventually banned from because I think I won the argument that you couldn't use steel shot in Damascus guns. In Britain, guns are proofed by two proof houses, London and Birmingham. If it's proofed for two pressures, standard pressure and high pressure, which you may in the States call magnums. If a gun is proofed, it can use the cartridge that it's proofed for. It has nothing at all to do with what type of shot is used. So if a Damascus gun is proofed as a high performance proof, which is magnum cartridges, it can use steel shot. And that's from a gunsmith. That's the knowledge that I've got. But Basque, being the experts, were telling me, no, you can't use steel in Damascus guns. Yeah, well, that's another story altogether. Anyway, as you can see, from the UN down, right the way down to the shooting bodies, they were all trying to get lead banned. And at the end of the day, when the Lead Ammunition Group met, it was thanks to the Countryside Alliance. Sir Barney Spunner, I went up to London and had a 2-hour meeting with him. And I gave him all the evidence that I had, and he could see where I was coming from. He agreed with me, and he walked from the Lead Ammunition Group and took the other shooting organisations with him. Therefore, we had a split committee, and therefore the government couldn't ban lead ammunition. And in the end, Liz Truss, who was the Environment Secretary, came out and told John Swift that they hadn't come up with the evidence that was needed to ban lead shot. So I won. I won. I'm glad I won. I was on my own. And if it wasn't for the Countryside Alliance and Sir Barney Spunner, we would have been in the sugar.